Welcome, baddies, to this episode of Called to Be Bad, where I talk with JS or Joon Park, who is a hospital chaplain, a former atheist/agnostic, a 6th degree black belt, and a Korean American who follows Christ. We start by looking into his journey, how he found himself in chaplaincy or hospital ministry. We go into how he maintains a non-anxious and non-judgmental presence in the face of incredible suffering on a daily basis, and how Joon carries the stories of his patients as a way to honor them. I hope you enjoy. Oh, and for your homework, if you haven't yet, go and follow us on Instagram. That would be awesome. Okay, bye.
And so it's tough. I think it sounds maybe easy for someone. Oh, I can just sit there and listen. But some of the stories that we end up hearing, it's always going to touch at something in ourselves.
Okay. 1, 2, ready, go.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dig into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, the stuff that makes good church folks squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holy trouble we get into today. Hello, Joon.
Mariah, hello.
Welcome again to Called to Be Bad. Joon and I have been on a long journey trying to record this episode, so I'm really excited to finally talk to you about chaplaincy. Yeah, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit first before we get into things?
Yeah. I'm so glad this interview is happening. I love the concept of your podcast. And I know we have tried to make this work, and today it's going to work. I know it is.
It's going to work.
Yeah.
Manifesting it.
Yeah. So I'm a hospital chaplain. I've been a chaplain now for 8 years. I work at 1,000+ bed hospital that's always at capacity, and it's a level 1 trauma center. So we get car accidents, gunshot wounds, fire, fall, stabbings, stroke, all sorts of high acuity cases. And part of my role is grief counsel, being a presence for those who are in the worst days, worst moments of their lives. And I attend every single death. We attend Code Blue, which is our resuscitation efforts. We assist with end-of-life care. So a lot of it is really being a presence at bedside and offering comfort and care and helping navigate families and patients through very, very difficult situations. And so I guess I've said it before, I'm like a cross between a priest and a therapist, or a therapriest. Yeah, like I sit.
That's good.
Yeah, I sit at the intersection of mental health and faith, and so the conversation can go where it wants. And some people who have never been in that situation before, I'm able to help guide them with a little bit of the knowledge and experience that I have.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you've done the CPE training, clinical pastoral education. Is that right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, that's cool. You know about that. Back in 2015, I did my internship. That was 6 months, and then I did the year-long residency. So 4 CPE units. Yeah, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah, that's one thing that's on my list of things to do in life. Because my dad is a chaplain. He was a pastor for the first 20 years of my life. He was I guess he was a pastor for 22 years, and then he moved to chaplaincy. That's why in our last interview I asked you, I was like, okay, I'm curious, Joon, if you're if your road to chaplaincy was something that I see all the time, which is someone goes from seminary into ministry, gets burned by the church, and so they either go to chaplaincy or spiritual direction. I see it a lot. And yours was, I think you went to chaplaincy after ministry. Is that right?
Yeah, and I'm only smiling because you hit the entire journey. That's exactly right. Yeah, so it's when you said burned by the church, yeah, probably 5th degree burns there.
Oof.
Yeah. I mean, I got into seminary, and I've only said this a few times out loud, but I was still mostly an atheist at that time. I really just wanted to go to seminary to get a degree to help people as a pastor. And I was open to faith, open to spirituality, but I didn't subscribe to a lot of the stuff that I discovered in the evangelical church. I mean, I grew up atheist, kind of fell into church sideways. And so I was sort of this undercover progressive, for lack of a better word. And then, got into church thinking, I'm going to change things from the inside. I can make waves. And I was so optimistic. I mean, I'm still like an optimist, but back then just so wide-eyed and like, I can make it. But after 7 years, I was so burned by everything. I think I just discovered over time, I was not good at the church politics, and I was not good. I didn't know whose hand to shake. I didn't know how to be in the back room and the boardrooms and that sort of thing. A lot of it felt like fundraising, and it's not saying anything new, but a lot of the church leadership, I just didn't know going in it would be that way. And then I didn't know actually at the time that, looking in hindsight, there was a lot of spiritual abuse happening, and very toxic leadership. And I think my radar, or I think my like understanding of abuse was not fully formed yet. I think because I grew up in an abusive household, so I tolerated way more than I think I should have. So, I guess looking back now, now I can safely say like that's what it was, sadly. And I'm glad I'm out, I mean, I think I did good work. I met great people that I'm still friends with. But being in chaplaincy is just it was almost like paradise compared to where I was.
Which is wild because you are literally face to face with trauma every single day, literal trauma. And yet that is a better atmosphere than the church. There's there's so much there. I'm curious about like going to seminary, atheist and everything. But first I want to know what you're drinking before we get too deep into everything.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Here's like my sales pose. I'm holding
perfect.
this is a tiny mason jar, and it is filled with a coffee that I make at home. It's cold drip or slow drip. And so this is like the strongest way to extract like high concentrated coffee. It is very strong. I make it at home. I put some oat milk in it. And it's my favorite. I can't go back to the coffee shop after drinking this.
So do you drink that like throughout the day? Like, do you have like I'm picturing you with like a Camelback at work, like just like drinking your slow drip, super caffeinated coffee. They're like, wow, our chaplain's really energetic.
Yeah. I don't know. I try not to drink it after like 2 or 3 p.m. But
Okay.
I feel like I need this to get through all of the things of life.
Yeah. That's very understandable.
Yeah.
And now
How about yourself?
I really want to try it. What?
Yeah.
You'll have to send me like your process or like your recipe or however you do it.
Yeah.
But so I am drinking regular coffee, which is kind of unique for me because I normally only have 1 cup in the morning and it's like 1 p.m. in the afternoon, but I'm going to go with a second. So we can both be like hyper caffeinated and chatty. And the reason I picked this mug is, as I was saying before, my dad is a chaplain and he, like me, gets like these like hyper fixations and like gets all excited about things. And his latest one was, for a while, and I think still now, it was candle making and candle mold making. So we'd like make the mold to make the candle. Anyways, but before that, it was like ceramics and pottery. So like he would be able to tell you like why this mug is special. But it's just like a plain white ceramic mug, but it's his mug. So whenever he visits, this is his mug. So this episode is dedicated to him as a chaplain and to all the chaplains out there. So so first, quick before we get into chaplaincy, you grew up atheist or found yourself an atheist and you went to seminary and now you're in chaplaincy and are still like, what is it too personal to ask what your relationship with faith is now as a chaplain?
No, so during my residency 2016, 2017, I did lose my faith for a season. And then I did eventually come around, but came back differently.
Okay.
And I think since then I've been like back and forth here and there. I grew up an atheist because early on I discovered my parents did not plan on having me. And so I know atheism has a lot of different like camps as well. And so I can't speak for all of atheism when I say that when I discovered that, I just thought there's no God, no plan, no purpose. And so I thought all of life is just chaotic, haphazard, meaninglessness. And I was a cosmic accident. And so I became very nihilistic. And again, I can't speak for all atheists on that. But for myself, it affected me pretty drastically and deeply. But I would say, having become a Christian, the way that happened almost accidentally was falling into this small, tiny Korean church that just loved me and loved me. And, they asked me to play drums for their praise team, their praise band, I guess. And, I said, well, is it a problem that I'm an atheist? And they were like, no, that's fine. I said, cool. All right.
As long as you can play drums well, we don't
Yeah,
care
yeah.
what you believe in.
Like, yeah, as long as you got the sticks, I'll go, So I play the drums for them, and they were just so loving and kind. And it's weird thinking about it now because I'm like, would I have found a church like that today? Because just even the church now looks so different than when I went, 20 years ago or so.
Sure.
But I mean, like now looking, now I guess through chaplaincy, I've found it sometimes easier to just go back to my atheism because it often feels like to believe something is harder than just to not have hope, to, not have some sort of faith. And so there are times it's very touch and go. I just see too much, I see too much suffering. And sometimes I'm like, it's just easier not to believe that anything happens for any kind of reason or there's any kind of plan or purpose around it. And then other times I'm like, faith is all I got. I have to believe that there is some source of inalterable goodness and hope in the universe, even if I can't see it right now.
Yeah.
And so, it's back and forth. It can be week to week sometimes. But I think right now, I guess if you were to ask me like where I'm at right now, I'd say I'm holding on, or rather it's holding me together. And so, I think I'm kind of okay right now at the moment.
In this very second in life, I'm okay. Yeah. Oh man, I feel that so deeply. Like it's like these moments of, how could a God allow or some would even believe orchestrate the kind of suffering that exists. And then sometimes it's like, how could I not? Like you see this like, I don't know if this makes sense, but there's something like exquisitely beautiful when you are faced with like the like rawness of like these life and death moments or suffering, and like there's also this side of it that was like, how could I not believe in something greater going on, whether it's God or not, in those moments? Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes, like I'll see divine moments happening in hospital rooms, and I don't mean somebody was resuscitated after we prayed for them.
Right.
I don't mean like miracles or things like that, but, I'll see the way sometimes, like in the PD ICU, pediatrics, I'll see the way that, like the love of a child or the love of a parent for their child, or just the um, like I've seen when parents are hurting, seeing their children hurt, and then the way the child is almost like telling their parents, like, it's okay, I'm okay. And just seeing that kind of almost divine, complex, layered love, it's almost enough to make me believe like this is supernatural. And there is this divine connection happening in the room. And maybe that's cheesy or too easy or something, but when I see moments like that and I'm like, gosh, there's something happening here that is speaking to a greater, bigger truth than myself that I can comprehend.
Yeah. 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 And I think it matters less what language we put to that, but rather than kind of the recognition or the kind of witnessing to
Yes.
to whatever is happening, like bearing witness. Yeah, it's just amazing that as pastors, chaplains, that we are invited into those spaces. But okay,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure I got this right. So you grew up an atheist, and yet you went to seminary. What like nugget, like what was like the desire to push you into seminary? And then how did you go from being an atheist seminarian to being like deep into an evangelical church, and then found yourself into a little Korean church, and then found yourself a chap? Like piece those things together for me.
Yeah, I'll try to make a short story longer. No, I'll try to make a long story shorter. I so there are a lot of, I guess, honest pieces to this that will sound, in hindsight, sort of ridiculous. But like, I went to college. It took me 7 years to graduate, and I changed majors maybe 3 times. And so already that clues you in. I have a hard time with deciding, you know? So
it happens.
yeah, so in my last semester, I was either going to go for my doctorate in psychology, my PsyD, or a PhD, or I had this option of going to seminary. And that Korean church that I was attending at the time said, "We will pay for your seminary." And so looking at it
They
now,
must have thought you were a really good drum player. They wanted to keep you around.
I guess so. Like at that point, I was like teaching Bible studies and stuff, and like
Okay.
helping with the youth group, and I loved doing it. I think I was leading praise by that point because I learned guitar like very, I guess, quote unquote, late in life. I was like in my mid-20s by this point. So looking at like, oh, I can get a scholarship for seminary, there's part of me, I think, in the sense of like hustle and capitalism and what are my options. Like I probably took that scholarship because like it would have been a lot easier just on my life, because I
Sure.
wasn't making money, and I just was struggling like, well, how am I going to work? Because with this ID or the PhD, I maybe could have looked for a scholarship, but that would have been a very difficult search, and I hadn't done it through my college years. I didn't have things lined up. So there's this almost maybe it's selfish or human part of me that took the opportunity because I knew it would be easier. But then this other part of me though, like I was like, okay, do I want to get into the field of therapy or the field of quote unquote, faith of church? I think there was a calling for me towards ministry and thinking, I could get into the pastoral ministry to change things from the inside. Like I had those big dreams, and like, for example, like I think some people started to discover, like some youth students started to find out like, oh, he's got some values that are not like super hyper conservative. Like I was more centrist / progressive, maybe towards the side. And like, I was always affirming, and I didn't say that out loud in the church a lot, but I would get into debates with some of the leaders and stuff of like, almost to the point of just flat out saying I'm affirming, but saying like, well, why can't we invite and love the LGBTQ community? And why can't we, and I think in 2008, like I voted no against that Florida proposition that, they wanted to define marriage as between man and woman. And I voted no. And then like the church members that I knew at least voted, yes on that. So things like that, where students would come to me and say like, hey, I think I might be gay, or hey, like my parents are beating me, or hey, like things like that, where maybe they wouldn't have felt safe to tell someone. And I'm not trying to brag or say that they didn't tell anyone else or something, but I felt like I can make real change here. I can be this person for them. I can be a safe person in this church. And maybe that means I can be this undercover person here. So I tried that, and I really tried for almost 7 years to be this kind of person of changing things from the inside. And I think I stayed way longer than I should have. Like that first church, I stayed for 5 years, that small Korean church. And they ended up letting me go. And it was just a series of bad things that happened. And I would have stayed at that church and probably died there, you know? Um, and I'm glad that they eventually let me go, because I think it was almost like an abusive relationship, you know? Like I just,
Okay.
yeah, like I was really, really, really being spiritually harmed and abused there. But I felt like loyal or dedicated to the leadership and to the people. And there are still youth students, college students, young adults that I keep in touch with to this day, families I still keep in touch with over there. But then the second church I went to almost 2 years was another small Korean church. And it was much better, much healthier. They paid me well. I thought I would stay there too. But then the second year, I realized, you know what, even though I'm in this place that's much healthier and I'm happier, this work still isn't for me. There
Okay.
was no one problem I could point to, and I walked away. And that was 4 months before I got married. So
Oh,
I,
wow. Yeah.
I got married without a job. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
got into
Big
chaplaincy in
transitions.
2015. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So lots of like wild transitions and like trying to keep integrity to myself and authentic while serving people around me that were so much different than me. So I think I've
Yeah.
always been this kind of person that wants to build bridges and like, you know, hangs out with and talks with, converses with people that I would disagree with fundamentally on almost everything. But just my heart is for all those kinds of people that, you know, and you know, I'm answering now very long, but I think the
No,
last
you're
thing I'll say
fine.
on that is, yeah, I mean, like these conservative camps that I've been in, or any camp really, but those with more extreme or fundamentalist beliefs, when I sit with people one on one, it's like I end up hearing like, you know, I'm not like those other people. This is what I actually believe. And I keep hearing that over and over.
Yeah.
And what I found is that those kinds of camps where people have to publicly subscribe to this dogma, like individually and personally, though they may verbally say, here's my dogma and here's what I believe what the church says in the creed, like personally, they don't. Their values socially and culturally and politically are very different. And so I think people fear losing community.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I wanted to be that confidant or vault for them. And then eventually have people like feel safe that they can say what they really believe. But you know, in not every church, it's safe to do that. Not every community, it's safe to do that. And so now I feel like I'm in a place where I can hold all those conflicted and disagreeing values together.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure you have to do that every single day. Like each hospital room that you walk into, there's going to be, you know, each person is going to have a different relationship with faith or non-faith, etc.
To your point, yeah. I mean, when I go room to room, it's like space travel. Like I'm visiting a different planet every single time. And chaplains, you know, a pastor imparts and preaches information. A chaplain, we're a presence. We don't
Yeah.
preach. You know, and you had mentioned your dad's a chaplain. I'm sure he told you about that. You know, we visit every single room, regardless of faith background, religion, tradition, wherever they're coming from. I've seen all kinds of different patients. And of course, their reaction to me, sometimes they kick me out of the room or they see religion, you know, they don't want anything to do with it. And it's completely understandable, whether that's church abuse or they just don't want any, you know, thing that reflects God in the room.
Yeah.
Some people who are not religious will ask for a chaplain because they just want to talk to somebody about these matters of theology and mortality, and they just want a safe person to talk with. But yeah, chaplains are, you know, the technical clinical definition, I guess, is non-judgmental, non-anxious, comforting presence. And that, yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, like, that you are a presence, not a preacher. You bring a presence, not, you don't preach to people. Which honestly I think that every pastor could benefit from, like doing more presence, less preaching. Unless you're literally preaching from the pulpit and then that's what you're supposed to be doing. Um
Yep.
so like how do you maintain this sense of non-anxious, non-judgmental presence? Like how do you kind of create the boundaries to not take on the suffering and pain and grief that you see day in, day out?
Yeah. So I can say this on two levels, and maybe we could do like an exercise so that whoever's listening can kind of like
yeah.
practice. Yeah.
Okay. Let's do
So
it.
like, Mariah, I'm going to pretend I'm a patient. Okay.
Okay.
And then you can kind of give me your internal monologue after I tell you my story. You can tell me what you were thinking at the time.
Okay.
So I'm a patient. All right. Chaplain Mariah, the reason that I'm here at the hospital is because I got in a car accident. I was being chased by the police, and they were trying to bust me because I had sold 8 pounds of meth that morning. And I crashed my car into a crowded mall. And I am injured and I am under arrest still. I was raising money because I have 7 kids and I have 2 girlfriends and I have to feed them. And the only way that I know to do that, because I didn't graduate high school, is I have to sell meth. And that's why I'm here. And I feel guilty about it. I feel terrible. I wish there was another option for me in life, but this is all that I know that I can do. And I've tried to get jobs. I've done so many job interviews, and because of the tattoo on my neck, nobody will hire me, and that's why I'm here. Now, Mariah, I'm going to ask you, just speaking in terms of non-judgmental presence, what was your internal monologue as I was speaking? And you can be as honest as you like.
Yeah, well, I found myself definitely going into pastoral mode and just my frustrations went to capitalism and a system that just shits on everyone, like especially those in the lower socioeconomic status, and just a sense of like not fairness, like that it and the kind of privilege that I carry that that I wouldn't end up in that situation. So I found myself I didn't have a hard time not judging that person, but I've also had to practice those skills a lot. And maybe it's because there wasn't something in your story that caught me personally. And or there's what I find myself getting caught up in is if there's a possibility of me being able to help that person or feel like I can like fix that person, then I know I'm in trouble pastoral wise. Because I go into fix it mode rather than pastoral mode. So yeah, I mean, it depend as far as like getting caught up in the emotions. If they're very activated and very loud and very like, if I got overstimulated, then I would have a hard time with the calm presence. But
Yeah,
that's kind of what was going on in my head. Just like this frustration that this man felt like he had to go to these extreme lengths to feed his family. And
yeah. And I'll say, Mariah, that your kindness and compassion is really shining and showing. And I know that there may be some people listening, or there may be some pastors who sit with that story. And for them, what would come up is moralism. For them, what would come up is, well, here's the way you need to fix your life. Or, son, when are you thinking about finally quitting and getting a real job? And it's one of those things where, or the 2 girlfriends thing, or, how many kids do you have? There are people who, in more traditional circles, I guess, would find those points in the story to go against their own moral grid and would speak then out of that moral grid as if to fix that person.
Sure.
And what you told me about capitalism and this person struggling, I mean, those are very, very compassionate things that you're saying. Things that I think come from years of like, really understanding and having empathy. And I think you have like this advanced empathy almost, Mariah, I know, really.
And that's what gets me in trouble though, is, well, not trouble, but like, that's what I think this is the heart of what I'm asking you here is I do have a hard time not taking on other people's, like, I would have a harder time because I would start to grieve for this person, and all that they have lost rather than like judge them, because at least the pastoral context that I'm in, I hear similar stories. And so that's kind of part of my job. Yeah, it's the more emotional. And so I've had to like have practices where I like imagine, this is my boundary setting like imagination, is I imagine like a plexiglass wall between me and someone else if I find myself getting caught up, like my feelings are mirroring their feelings. And so I say like I can see and hear what is happening. You know, I'm still present, but their feelings can't touch me. Their feelings can't become my feelings, because then we're not then it's not presence. Then we're not walking together. Then I'm taking on their stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And, speaking to the non-anxious part of that,
Yeah.
yeah, I think sometimes there is an instinct or impulse in me to, when I hear a really extreme story or a hard story, I want to jump in and fix, or I want to see what resources I can gather,
Right.
and my feelings move me to immediately trying to find the right person or connection or something, like, oh, have you talked with a social worker yet? Or, oh, let me get a therapist for you. Or, oh, when you leave, let me try to find affordable housing for you. And
Yeah.
people, like patients, can sense that sort of anxiety when it exudes that way, where I'm not really sitting with them, I'm not really listening to them, I'm just trying to become a savior at that point. And
Yeah.
so there are different levels of anxiety. And for the judgmental part, I mean, I think when I hear a person's story, there are tendencies in me that start to moralize certain things. When a patient tells me, I think anyone would naturally do that depending on their values as they grew up. And so I think for me, if I hear an extreme or hard story like that, I have to sit with, and like you very, very amazingly did, Mariah, like really sit with the reasons of how they got to be in the place where they're at. Like, what is the bigger, broader story here? And for me, having grace means seeing the whole picture, and it's picture making. So I'm seeing as much as I can, as broadly as I can, almost from a divine perspective of like, if I had this same person's situation, background, and resources, I may have ended up in the very same situation that they're in now.
Yeah.
And so it's not for me to moralize, not for me to make a value judgment. This person is still cherished and loved, regardless of what they have done or how they got in that situation. And so we've had patients who, they may have gotten cancer, of course, no fault of their own. And then we may have had patients, and I've judged them hard, where, they got into an altercation because they, had hurt someone else's child or something like that. And so they got beat up. Do I have sympathy and empathy for this abuser? There's a part of me that's like, this person needs to face accountability and justice, of course. And what they did is monstrous if they hurt this other person's child. And at the same time, if they call for a chaplain and they want to confess, or they want to share their guilt, or they just needed somebody there at the moment, I have to try as best as I can, against my own better judgment or against my impulse, to sit with that person and try to understand, where they're coming from, what they're going through. And so it's tough. I think it sounds maybe easy for someone, oh, I can just sit there and listen. But some of the stories that we end up hearing, it's always going to touch at something in ourselves. And that's why it's so important to be in touch with ourselves as we offer care. And, to your other point about the plexiglass thing, I like that image. I think I tend to see it as like the glass is permeable, meaning like, sometimes, overlap happens, and sometimes feelings do get shared and mixed up. And like, I wish I was one of those people that could leave work at work, but I have a really hard time doing that. I carry my patients with me in their stories. And I think that is what makes me a chaplain and a human. I know some of the chaplains, they can leave like work at work, but yeah, I really, I think there's a part of me that feels with, and at the same time tries to remain that peaceful, non-anxious presence as best I can.
Yeah. Can I ask more questions about that? Because I'm just really trying to figure out how you would do that. Like my reference point is my dad, so that's why I keep referencing him. But as far as chaplains go, he'll come home and he is just like at capacity, like he, and so he would, have to either immediately lay down, take a nap, or kind of do something mindless, watch TV to kind of reset his brain. So you bring kind of the emotions or the stories or whatever with you home. What do you do with them then? Can you let them metabolize, or yeah, I don't know if I'm asking the right question here, but
Yeah, right. No, it totally makes sense. I mean, every chaplain has a different process for that. Like you were mentioning your dad, he needs some
mm-hmm.
time to kind of center himself. I know someone told me that because of the work that they do, I think they were like a first responder for something, but they said every time they came home and they had a family and everything, there's a corner room that they would go into for 10 minutes before saying hi to their family. And they would say, for that 10 minutes, that door has to be locked. So
Sure,
that was their
sure.
process, you know? And I I guess my process is maybe mostly random, but I'm very lucky that I have a 45-minute drive to work and then a work
Oh,
drive home. And that time I use to kind of that's like a buffer time for me.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah, and then I love writing and I do all the other regular self-care things like exercise and trying to eat right and all those, things that we do to tolerate capitalism, I guess. you know.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
preach.
it's like yeah, the corporation's like you're the problem. Take care of yourself. That's self-care. No, it's
Yeah.
I'm being cheeky, but yeah, I to be truthful, it's really hard to do the work that I do and keep doing it and then just think, like recharge my battery to 100%. That's not, I think the work that I do, it's always going to be hard and I'm always going to carry it with
Mm,
me. But what I'm learning is that when I hold the story, I used to think I have to let it go somehow or jettison the story or like sever it from myself. But I think holding the story is also a way for me to honor that person and
mm,
their life or what they said or something about them, their aura, their essence, their being has become a part of me now too.
mm,
And that's a way that I can love and honor my patient. And I used to shame myself for thinking like, oh, I can't just keep carrying all these stories. But now I'm realizing that that's just part of my process and who I am as a person. And
mm,
sometimes it feels heavy, but other times it's almost like I'm carrying this cloud of witnesses or I'm honoring all these people who have gone before me. And it's really a privilege, and honor, like a beautiful dignity to carry them, to carry their memory.
mm.
And so, yeah, there's never going to be a time when it's not hard, but I don't want to shame myself for the hardness of that work. And when I feel it in my body, I just let myself feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. I read somewhere or watched a TikTok or something that said that your body metabolizes emotions in like, oh, I forget what time frame it was. It was like 15 seconds or something. So if you can let yourself feel, the grief or anger or whatever emotion is bubbling up, if you let it go through your body, if you allow it there for that 15 seconds, then you can kind of come back to baseline. What happens is an emotion will bubble up and we'll be like, no, can't feel it. And so it resets that clock over and over and over again. And it doesn't allow ourselves to like metabolize or feel that emotion. So
Wow.
I kind of hear you saying you allow the emotions to be there. You recognize and honor the story where those kind of feelings came from. And in a sense, you do metabolize that emotion. It goes through your body, but you hold on to the story, which is so beautiful. And like it makes me think of like that's kind of like being immortal or eternal life is someone if someone carries your stories with them. Yeah, I keep saying I don't
Yeah.
know if that makes sense because my ideas are
No,
just yeah.
no. You're hitting on all of it. And no, I was going to ask if the 15 seconds are in dog years or regular human time. 'Cause maybe
Yeah,
mine's longer than, or
I know,
hospital time,
right?
which is always a time like no one can tell what time it is in the hospital.
Oh,
But yeah, like I have, so on my phone,
yeah.
I journal every time I see a patient, and I've been doing that since my very first. Like I could just keep
Oh my
going.
gosh.
Yeah.
So
And
you literally carry your patients with you in your phone, in your pocket.
yeah, like even if it's just something that they said, you know, and anything I ever write about online, I always change the details for their privacy.
Sure.
But like the actual stories are in there and I keep them with me. Even if it's just
Mm,
one quote they said, I'll
yeah.
just put like their first initial in a quote or something like
Mm,
that. Cause it's like that was meaningful, that was moving, or that's maybe something that, you know, even if I'm the only one who remembers that or hears it, I want to keep
mm,
that with me. And that's my way of honoring them before God, you know? And so
mm.
I think that is part of my practice. And maybe that's like spiritually metabolizing, you know, the
Yeah.
story. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's really beautiful. My sister is a physical therapist, and for any of her patients that pass away, she writes down their birthday on her calendar, and so she honors them whenever their birthday pops up. Yeah, the people in the helping positions have to find some sort of ritual to honor their work and keep going. Are there any of those stories that you can share that would feel appropriate?
In fact, and you know what? I think the word that you use, ritual, is exactly the right word. Like, I guess for lack of a better word, because I mean, ritual, when some people think of that word, it's very loaded. You know, it's almost like
Mm.
something religious or something bound by tradition and restricted by a certain formula. But death rituals, grief rituals, to me, are so important in our body understanding just the incomprehensibility of loss. It gives us some kind of
Mm.
anchor or foothold for that. Because loss in itself, when you think about it, it is absurd. Just this person is gone, or that thing, or that dream is gone. Just even thinking of that, the terror and horror of it. And for me, ritualizing that loss, you know, like you were talking about birthdays, in Korean culture, we celebrate death days. It's called Chesa.
Mm.
So our mothers and fathers who've gone before us, every year we get together and do almost like a service where we read through a timeline of their life, their accomplishments, and we each share stories. And then we eat together. And I think, you know, Western and Eurocentric cultures are scared of doing stuff like that
Mm.
because
Yeah.
death has become some sort of horror movie trope and, you know, very macabre and morbid. But death being
Mm.
embraced with ritual, I think, is one of the ways that our body can grieve in a healthy way and a needed way.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think to share a story with you, I actually posted this recently.
Mm.
Um, and so, um, yeah, it's a story that's already there, but I changed details, but basically I visited a patient who asked me to call a family member for them. And when I called the number that was on file, the patient's sibling, that the person that they were looking for, their sibling picked up and said, actually, that person has been dead for years. And so I went back to my patient and I did
Mm.
not tell them that. And maybe they were suffering from trauma or dementia, or there was something going on where they could not remember they had
Yeah.
lost that person.
Wow.
And, you know, that raises a lot of ethical questions like, is it on me to do what's called reality orientation? You know, patients with Alzheimer's, you know, do we ground them
Mm.
back into the reality of what's happening? You know, or did this person have an arrangement with their family that, you know, always tell me the truth or never tell me the truth? And I don't know that as a chaplain. So my role as a chaplain then is to validate where this person is, not to try
Yeah.
to reorient them back to reality. And I think a lot of healthcare is moving away from that harder reality orientation and to a softer one. And
Mm.
so in some way, this my patient, she was keeping her memory of the person she lost by forgetting that memory. And so to me, there was just so many layers to that
Yeah.
about loss of memory and honoring memory by forgetting the loss.
Mm.
And what do I do as a chaplain? What do we do as healthcare workers? And so the team and I did decide, yeah, I don't think we should tell our
Mm.
patient that that person is gone. That's not, you know, is it our responsibility or our role? And some would disagree with that. Some would say, no, we do need to reorient that person back. But
Mm.
I think that person, their body, you know, their mind forgot. And that was the way their body needed to grieve, that the mind would forget. You know, when my wife, she went through postpartum depression, in the first 5-6 months of our daughter being born. Our daughter now is 3.5. And, my wife went through a very severe case. It was debilitating. And I became essentially, for a while, a caretaker for my wife and our daughter.
Mm.
And this was during 2020 at the, beginning height of the pandemic.
Oh.
So we didn't have any help. Well, actually, I was very lucky that I did have some help, but it was very limited, But I say that to say my wife doesn't remember those 5 months. And I wonder, there's a part of her that's very sad about that, of course, that she doesn't remember the first 5 months of our daughter's life. But there's her body, I think, coped with the trauma of that PPD by purposefully blocking it. And maybe that, there's layers to it. It's sad. And it also, I think there's a hidden mercy in that, like a blessing in disguise almost. And so would it have been better if she remembered? I'm not sure. But her body chose to forget. And so I'm glad I took a lot of pictures and videos at the time because my wife can look back at it. Even being in the state that we were, I wanted to keep the memory of it, of all of it. But I think that was her body's way of grieving that time, of forgetting. And so it's hard. And at the same time, I think maybe in some small way, it is its own blessing.
Yeah, the body protecting itself. I've heard people say that about coping mechanisms, that they are morally neutral. That they're something. I mean, how was it? Maybe not morally neutral, but coping mechanisms are neutral, as in they are the ways that you are trying to get from point A to point B, and instead of berating yourself for your current coping mechanism, can you recognize like the little steps? I'm not quoting that quite right, but just kind of acknowledging the incredible way that our bodies protect ourselves, our minds. Yeah. I also really appreciate what you were saying about the reality orientation and kind of the discernment process that goes into, do you kind of rip them from their current reality into the really real or whatever. And I appreciate the kind of grace there of letting them be in their own reality, because that is what is real for them. Whether it's real for us or not, it's real for them. And whether that is in, kind of what you were saying, like telling them, okay, someone passed away, or their worldview also, like kind of treading lightly and not going in and ripping it apart and being like, well, the Bible doesn't actually say that, or, whatever, just kind of like you're saying, like being present instead of preaching your own reality, preaching your own worldview and faith. And yeah, that's incredible. Also, just the incredible strength of carrying your spouse and daughter through that time, and man, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I do write about some of that time in the book that's coming out in May. There's a chapter on mental health.
Did I know that you were coming out with a book? I don't know if I did. Maybe I forgot.
Yeah, I can't publicly say the name of the book yet.
Okay.
In mid-January, I'm allowed to.
Okay.
But I have a book on grief coming out in May, and each chapter is a different dimension of grief. And I think chapter 3 is about the grief of losing mental health. And so I talk about from the perspective of the person who has the mental health affliction and the caretaker's position as well. And so I bring up my own story in that. Yeah.
Well, can we have you back on? Because I feel like this conversation is unfinished. I have so many other questions I want to pick your brain for, but we have 2 minutes left for when you need to leave. Is that right?
Yeah. But no, I would love to come back if you'll have me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be really great, because I want to ask you more questions about grief. So we can do an episode on chaplaincy. This will be like the intro, and then say, come back in May or whenever, when your book comes out, and then we can talk about your book and grief and all of those things. That would be really great. Cool. Well, any final words for anyone listening or wanting to get into chaplaincy or understand more about chaplaincy? Anything to kind of wrap us up?
I just wanted to encourage you. I think you're really good at this. And earlier when you said, I don't know if I'm quoting it right, I liked your version of it. So I don't think the original quote is as good as what you had, you had said it. So
Okay.
I think you're great,
Thank you.
Mariah. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you're good. You're very good at this. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks. Gosh. Yeah. Well, it's really lovely talking with you. Traditionally, we end the podcast with a blessing. So would it be okay if I bless you, Joon, and all of our baddies out there watching or listening to this episode?
I would love that. Yes. Thank you.
Joon and all of you beautiful baddies, may you go from this space filled with the grace of simple presence. May you be there for others. May you bear witness to all that comes up for them. May you acknowledge and honor the stories that your body carries, and may you tend to your own emotions, feelings, body, etc. Amen.
Amen.
It was a real pleasure meeting you, Joon. And seriously, I can't wait for your book. And I want to hear more of what's going on in your brain. So
yeah, thank you, Mariah. And your blessing made me tear up just a little bit, just thinking about my patients and the stories I carry. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Very, very kind of you.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's all for this episode of Called to Be Bad. Keep being your bad, beautiful selves, and I will see you next time.